second playoff victory Monday in as many weeks for the Detroit Lions. We hope to have many more of these over the next upcoming years and a couple of more over the next 3 weeks, if you know what I'm saying. But for now, we are going to enjoy this one. And obviously, the Lions, they didn't play a perfect game, but most playoff games are not. There's always going to be some moments where it's close. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers obviously are a worthy opponent. They made the playoffs as well. But, Stick, I know that you watched the game very intensely, as we all did. What were some of the on-field takeaways that you got from watching this game?
These guys are dogs, man. I mean, that's just it. Every time you need them to make a response, they did it. And that's really it. These guys are on a mission, and you just keep seeing it repeated over and over and over. And even in post-game interviews and what Dan Campbell says in his press conferences, that these guys are just built for this moment. And, you know, like I brought it up early, Penei Sewell pulling from the tackle position, leading sweeps. That's just unbelievable that we got that guy on our team. Amon-Ra St. Brown had one drop that I said to you was very costly in the first half.
Sure.
But from then on, it's just unreal what that guy can do. And I guess one thing I was thinking about this morning on my drive in, they fought for so many first downs that they didn't have initially. Like, you thought, oh, they're going to be about a yard short. Next thing you know, Amon-Ra pushes the pile. Next thing you know. And then bringing in Craig Reynolds on 4th and 1. Talk about the ultimate decoy, because I consider myself to be a decently smart football guy, right? You know, I try to think I understand the game. They run out Craig Reynolds, and I'm like, what are they doing? Now they know we're not going to run. And what do? They run. And so, like, Ben Johnson tricked me. He got me. And they haven't run a ton of trick plays over the past couple weeks, but to me, that was like mental trickeration. Like, we're not going to have Jahmyr Gibbs in here. We're not going to have David Montgomery in here. We're going to throw in Craig Reynolds, so the whole defense is going to be like, who the hell? Like, even at first, I'm like, who the hell is that running back right now?
Craig
Reynolds. And then Josh Reynolds getting the first touchdown.
Yeah.
It's these role players, and that's what makes this team such a team. You know, they don't go in relying on Jahmyr Gibbs, even though Jahmyr Gibbs going to do his thing, and we now know that against what was arguably one of the best run defenses over the past 5 weeks, at least, in the NFL. And that was part of what Dan Campbell's locker room speech was like, hey, we just knocked off another hot team. That was a hot team.
Oh, yeah.
You know, even though their records said what they were kind of like the Lions of the end of last year rolling into this, except they made the playoffs.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what I envisioned for the Lions last year if they got in. They could have made some noise at the 7 seed. They could have done it.
They could have.
But they didn't. But that's what I envisioned with the Bucs this year. They were on a roll. 15.3 points a game allowed over their past 5 games. That defense was strong, and you saw it in the first quarter. But just the resiliency of this team and how they just keep fighting, keep coming back, and you're never out of it. You're never out of it with these guys.
And that's the thing. They just seem to make all of the right plays that teams of years past, even some of the good ones, just couldn't make. It just seems like every time somebody steps up, and it's absolutely huge. And, yeah, those are obviously some great takeaways. Obviously, the offense they scored 31 points. That goes without saying. We're going to dig more deep into certain players who showed out and, like, you know, Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Samuel Porter. I'm going to, like, we'll get to that. But to me, I want to talk about the defense because at this point, and I've been guilty at it at times with certain players, I don't want to hear any more about how the defense isn't enough. And here's why. They have a bit of it doesn't seem like it would be a formula that works, but they did it again against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yep.
Ever since week 10 of the regular season, that after the bye week, going to play the Chargers in Los Angeles. 7 times the Lions let a number 1 receiver go absolutely off. And you saw it with Mike Evans in yesterday's game. Mike Evans had 8 catches for 147 yards and a touchdown. And K. Dotton, their tight end, he had a pretty big day too. But that's the thing. What did Chris Godwin do? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
what did
Trey Palmer?
Yes, Trey Palmer. Absolutely nothing. And what did their running game do? And I'll admit it, their running game, they were a little bit more successful than I thought they would be, especially with Rachaad White. But they only had 89 yards on 15 carries. For some reason, the Buccaneers decided to go away from it, I think, at times, even when they didn't have to. But the reality is, if you can hold any team to 89 yards rushing, you're pretty happy with it, even though it wasn't quite the performance that we're used to. But we've seen that 7 times, including in the last playoff game, including this playoff game. And in those games in which a number 1 wide receiver has gone off, nobody else really has, and they've stopped the run, the Lions. The Lions are 6-1 in those games, and the only loss was to Dallas, which we all know is there's some taint, sort of. there's some taint with that. Yeah.
That loss ended up being a good loss for this Detroit Lions
Sure.
team. It was the perfect storm for this Detroit Lions team.
Sure.
They got to experience what it felt like to kind of lose, and that's what's turned it around. Now they've gotten more sacks, because remember, they couldn't get pressure on the quarterback early in the season. So now they decide to blitz, and that leads to giving up big plays. That's just part of it. That's the risk-reward of taking another man out of coverage and blitzing him. And because of that, They give up big chunk plays to a number one wide receivers, because you're going to end up leaving Sutton one-on-one, and Sutton is doing his damn best. And I refuse to dog anybody on this Detroit Lions team, because even if you don't like Cam Sutton, he's the starting quarterback on the team that's going to the NFC Championship for you. There's never been another guy to do that for you. And I think it was 2 weeks ago I said that. No slander for anybody on this team anymore. If you don't like Derek Barnes, that's fine. But Derek Barnes is a linebacker going to the NFC Championship for you. So whatever you think the warts are, we can address that in the offseason, but these are our guys moving forward. So even if you don't like Cam Sutton, he's the guy who got you here. So don't bitch about it too much, fellas, or we can go back to the old ways when we don't even get to the playoffs.
No, that's fair. And for the record, I got to get on the stand. I've done a lot of bitching about Cam Sutton, and he didn't have his best day because he really hasn't in a while. But like you said, this isn't the day to really slander any Detroit Lions player, and I will keep that to a minimum as the week goes on and certainly leave it to nothing today, because it wasn't even just that. And you're right, the blitzing, the safety blitzes, the safeties have been a revelation when it comes to big plays like interceptions, sacks, tackles for loss. The safeties have been huge pretty much ever since the Denver game. But it wasn't just that the defense was bend but don't break. When you are bend but don't break, one of the things that you have to do is you have to create turnovers, and the Lions created 2 of them. But it wasn't just that. They got some big stops when they needed them, 3 and outs. Yep. I mean, I can go through a few of them right now. On the first drive of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, after the Lions had went 3 and out after they got the ball first, which is not something you ideally want to do. They got that pick by C.J. Gardner-Johnson. It set up a field goal. And after the Lions had taken a 10-3 lead, they forced a 3 and out. Let me see. Oh yeah, when the Bucs got the ball back coming out of halftime, they faced a 3rd and 4 from the Lions 38, and Aiden Hutchinson had that big sack to knock him out of field goal range. Yep. Yes, and with the score still tied 10-10 after the Lions failed to score, the Lions forced another 3 and out. They forced another 3 and out after the Lions had taken a 24-17 lead on that big Jahmyr Gibbs 37-yard touchdown run, and they had the game-sealing interception Derek Barnes did when the Buccaneers had a chance to drive down and tie the game. So the Lions defense, as we've always said, they're not perfect. They've struggled at times to get pressure at times, not so much anymore. They've struggled with number one wide receivers, but one thing that they will almost always do is they'll always stop the run, and they'll always make the timely plays when they need to, because at the end of the day, if you can create interceptions, if you can play good red zone defense, which they did against the Rams, and they created turnovers against the Buccaneers, you're going to win a lot of those games, because you can't stop everybody. It's the modern NFL.
Yeah, you got to pick your poison, and what the Lions have said is, hey, we're going to be that classic bend but don't break defense. You know, their red zone percentage is pretty strong for not allowing touchdowns. Buccaneers scored pretty much every time they were in the red zone yesterday, and that was supposed to be the Buccaneers' weakness. But I don't mind it. You know, hey, here's the deal. That guy's going to get yards. We know that. Your number one's going to go off. But nobody else is going to get fed today. Nope. And that's the important thing. This team, I'll keep bringing it back to the 2004 Pistons, but this team, that once again reminds me of like their strategy against Shaquille O'Neal, right? Like, hey, Shaq going to get his, we're going to guard him one-on-one with Ben Wallace, but you know who else isn't doing anything? Everybody else, because we're not collapsing our defense. We're not, trying to cover anybody that we can't, and that's what the Detroit Lions are doing right now. They're playing to their strength, and they're saying, we can't get pressure with our front four consistently. We have to bring the blitz. And it worked. Those blindside blitzes, that scheme, that is, if you don't like Aaron Glenn, that's fine. But that's him and Dan Campbell figuring out, hey, in this formation, these guys are shifting right. We could come off the edge, and they're not even going to look at it. And Brian Branch had the potential to get another one of those blindside sacks, but he jumped off sides a little. Got a little too excited there. But, I mean, I can't speak highly enough about just this entire organization. Like, you're not going to hear me say a bad thing, even about Aaron Glenn, about how the defense let up that touchdown before the end of the half. It's fine. They did it, and they recovered, and that's what good teams have to do.
The big plays that you're going to give up, they're going to be, if you can, like Ife Melifonwu, for example, ever since the Denver Broncos game. Iffy has been a revelation. I'll just say that. Nobody knew what we really had in him, but ever since then, he's been one of the best defensive players. Obviously, Brian Branch has been great all year, but in the last part of the season into the playoffs, I think he stepped up his game quite a bit. Kirby Joseph, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, their safeties have been absolutely amazing, even though their corners, their corners are in a tough spot. They haven't been great, but it's all well and good because at the end of the day, Mike Evans, the Lions aren't the only team that Mike Evans has torched. He's had 1,000 yards every single year he's been in the NFL for 10 years.
And CeeDee Lamb?
CeeDee Lamb. He was second in the NFL in receiving yards.
Justin
He's torched
Jefferson,
others.
pretty good wide receiver.
Probably
this week, though, is going to be a little bit different.
Yes.
That's the thing. They don't really have a true number one. Even Debo, as talented as he is, isn't a true number one wide receiver.
No. That's going to be tough because the San Francisco 49ers, they probably have the best group of actually, if you include Christian McCaffrey, definitely the best group of pass catchers in the NFL. We don't know about Debo's status, but we'll see. And like I said, the Lions just seem to have a formula that works. Again, Puka Nacua, when you break the all-time rookie receiving yards record, you're going to torch a lot of defenses, and the Lions were just one of those in his wake, but the Lions still won that game. So it doesn't really matter. I don't understand. I get it aesthetically when you see some of the stat lines of these receivers. You're like, oh, dear God, what were we doing? But at the same time, they're wins. Almost all of them, they're wins. And you'll also see a sack by Iffy. You'll see an interception. You'll see.
The stat that matters is on the scoreboard.
Of course.
So, you know what? I'll give up 400 yards a game to the top wide receiver as long as they're winning games. And Kool-Aid brought up a great point yesterday on the postgame show. He says with this defense, they're going to give up 20 points plus or minus 3. That's pretty much where they're at. It's either going to be 17, 20, or 23. So as long as the offense puts up more than 23, the Detroit Lions will win that football game. And you look back on it, what they let up yesterday? 23. What they let up against the Rams?
23.
And he's pretty consistent in that area. So we all know that the offense has to win games for this team. This team may give up 3 touchdowns a game on defense. And that's okay because that's the way this team is built. That's why you have a quarterback like Jared Goff, who I could not wait to get into that Jared Goff conversation.
Oh, we're going to get into that next.
And the deeper we go and the more the Jared Goff haters have to eat his, easy, and all the doubters, even Spenny last night on the postgame show had to pay homage to Jared Goff because you know what? Jared Goff got you here. Jared Goff is that man. Jared Goff has been that dude. It just took everybody a little while to realize it. And it took Jared Goff a little while to realize it, too. He lost what he had when he was coming out with that number 1 draft pick out of Cal. He lost a lot of that. But Dan Campbell has rebuilt this man. Brad Holmes has rebuilt this man. And when you have great leadership that allows your primetime players to grow, allows them to take control, some ownership, leadership can